Hello and welcome to the Echo Chamber podcast. My name is Tony Groves, and today we're going to be on our best behaviour, Martin. Can you behave yourself for 45 minutes, do you think?
No.
Martin, did you know people are starting to call you the Mad Hatter, by the way?
Yeah, I'm hearing this, but hats are stylish. I like hats.
Hats are stylish, but you're not stylish.
I take that as a compliment from you.
But much more important, we're delighted to be joined in the Tortoise Shack by security analyst, whistleblower, carer and advocate for people with disabilities, Dr. Tom Clonan. Tom, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, I think I was again guilty of going, come on, Tom. I'm like Mrs. Dial of the podcast world. Get them going. But and the reason I was kind of keen to do it is because we have spoken to people like Gareth Noble and Tracy McGuinness in relation to carers. We see online carers in crisis. We see these things where people are struggling to get basic services. But we also saw a government recently pass, as the last government in the OECD, to pass the UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities, and to pat themselves on the back for doing so while opting out of the optional protocol to make themselves accountable for not enforcing it. I know you're a really good voice on this. I know you've first-hand experience, and what did you make of the whole fallout from the passing it but not actually doing it?
Well, I was disappointed but not surprised that the government left out the optional protocol. So just to put it in context, I had no experience of disability, whether it be so-called intellectual disability or physical disability, but I have 4 children, and one of my boys, who's now 16, he developed a neuromuscular disease when he was 18 months old. And that, for me and for us as a family, was the day that we went through the looking glass, like Alice in Wonderland, where you go into this parallel universe in Ireland, where if you're sick or if you're vulnerable, you're confronted with just this labyrinth of obstacles and obstructions and lack of proper services and facilities. The disability issue for me, I look at my son Owen, and he's a beautiful young man. He's really blossoming. He's 16, and he so wants to be in the world, and he wants to participate socially. His curiosity about the world is just, but he can't get on the dart without giving 24 hours notice. He can't access the curriculum in school because he's partially sighted, and the textbooks are never available in large print format or in the audiobook format. And it is just a recurring theme with him. He's frustrated. He doesn't identify as disabled. He identifies as a young guy. He's interested in Doctor Who. He's interested in science fiction, but the state disables him and discriminates against him at every hand's turn. And the point I would always make is that if Owen was gay, or if he was black, or if he was Asian, or if he was a Muslim, and if he was denied access to the curriculum on that basis, or if he had to ring up the dart station 24 hours in advance because you're a Muslim, quite rightly there would be a huge protest about this. But for some reason, because he is so-called disabled, there's an acceptance or a tolerance of this, and it's not good enough. And it's not a medical issue. This is an equality issue. So to get back to your question, when the government passed the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, ratified it, I think the last member state in the European Union to do so, I welcome this. So I said it wasn't the beginning of the end, but it's the end of the beginning. We need to have a very strong, noisy, subversive, disruptive, angry, yes, equality campaign for our brothers and sisters who are different, simply by way of some physical difference or intellectual difference. We need to vindicate their rights. So it's a start, and we'll continue to apply pressure for the inclusion of that instrument that needs to be.
Yeah, I think you've summed it up very well. We often go back and talk about under the grounds of discrimination in the workplace. You can't discriminate on these grounds, and yet, as you so succinctly put it, your son is excluded. So it's discrimination by omission.
Yeah, and it's part of a wider piece. I mean, if you're vulnerable in Ireland, if you're an elderly person on a hospital trolley, or if you're somebody who finds themselves homeless, or if you're a person with a disability or a serious long-term illness, Ireland is a very, very cold place. And this is part of a broader change in our society. Like, I remember very well the 1980s. Ireland, it really was the era of the pitchfork and the candlestick. The World Bank was going to foreclose our national debt. Charlie Haughey, our Prime Minister, our Taoiseach, was telling us that we needed to tighten our belts. We had mass emigration. We had a huge security problem with the provisional IRA. But we were building social housing. We didn't have 2,000 homeless children in this city, in Dublin. And I'm so proud to be a Dubliner. It really upsets me to think that we have children in bed and breakfasts and so-called, accommodation centres, travelling across the city to go to schools, falling asleep in classrooms. So something has happened in Irish society. It has become a very cold place for people who are different. And it's not that we don't have the money to look after these people. It's not that we don't have the money to house people. It's an ideological decision on the part of people like Leo Varadkar, who is our first openly gay Taoiseach. He's the son of an immigrant. He's precisely the type of person who should be Taoiseach. And I'm very, very proud of him in that regard. But he is a very, very conservative man. He is a post-Thatcherite young Tory. And unfortunately, Pascal O'Donoghue and others, his fellow travellers, are hell-bent and determined on continuing this process of privatisation, of letting the market resolve huge social issues, where we're seen almost exclusively as economic units, consumers in an economy, as opposed to Irish citizens in a republic, especially 100 years on from the War of Independence and the establishment of this state. So I think in addition to a radical, noisy, subversive yes equality campaign for disability, there also needs to be a broader awakening of centre to left-wing politics in this country. It has to become coherent. We have to have some sort of a balance against this inexorable move to the right. And we were talking about this before we came up the stairs.
Yeah.
I would place the beginning of this trend in our society back to the Progressive Democrats. But which political party or which grouping will emerge to sort of recalibrate and reboot us back to a more caring, because we can do it. Like, we can do a lot better than this. We don't need to have children, homeless.
We don't need a housing minister reclassifying people to keep the homeless numbers under 10,000. When this is the kind of
there's a culture of I'm all right, Jack. Fuck you. And that's what's going on in Ireland. That's what Fine Gael sell. That's what Labour enabled them to sell. That's what Fianna Fáil are supporting them to sell. So that culture exists. But the thing, and it's the same with disability. You can be taken along thinking, yeah, I'm all right, Jack. Fuck you. But you can be that person the next day. Disability can hit anybody at any stage. And in fact, in our lifetime, all of us will hit some disability at some stage in our lifetime. We will. You'll have something go wrong where you will not be able to partake as you did. So why are people voting for this? Why are people voting for this? The answer is there's no real voice that's saying, if you vote for this, you're going to have angry people. You're going to have people on the streets. You're going to have people saying, no, fuck you. I want my bit too.
Yeah, but I think that's a very important point, though. And this all boils down to the social contract. When you get on an Aer Lingus flight or a Ryanair flight, when the cabin crew welcome you onto the aircraft, you look left at the cockpit and you assume that the people in the cockpit know how to fly the plane and that they're going to bring you to the destination that it says in your ticket, whether that be London or Brussels or whatever. But with politicians, there are good people who vote for Fine Gael. There are good people who vote for Fianna Fáil in the belief that they're going to be brought to a certain destination. But what's happening is our politicians are not responding, excuse me, our politicians are not responding to the needs of the people who elect them.
But they're only, the people who elect them are only, as we said, we said quite a bit with Fianna Fáil. The people, with Fine Gael, they only need, 36% of the electorate? They're only playing for a minority.
But once they get into power, and once they have their hands on the levers, there is a procession of lobbyists and special interest group who have their ear. So for example, in relation to my own situation with Owen, my son, who has a neuromuscular disease, in November of 2016, just last year, I did 2 programs on the state broadcaster and primetime television about my son's situation, not being able to get a wheelchair for his needs. And that generated almost 2 million social media interactions on Facebook and Twitter that directly addressed Leo Varadkar and Simon Harris. Over 2 million. They refused to meet us, they refused to engage with us, they refused to respond to us. However, a lobbyist for independent news and media can pick up the phone and get a minister like Denis Naughton immediately. Leo Varadkar gets a phone call from Donald Trump, and he's straight out the gate, responding to that. So our politicians, the social contract is broken. In other words, if you got on an Aer Lingus flight and they said they were going to take you to London and instead they dropped you off somewhere in the Middle East, that's what our politicians are doing. They've broken the social contract. And we know from the cervical check scandal, and we know from all of the other scandals, that they are engaged now collectively in very proactive strategies of deception, concealment, lying through very well paid media advisors, program managers, all of whom are politically appointed, unaccountable, paid for by taxpayers' money, to not act in the public interest, but to act exclusively in the interests of the political profile or the public relations profile of the people they elect. So there's this issue in play.
And to come back at Martin and actually both of you in a way, we talk about, saying that the public don't care. There's also an element of this where the narrative is controlled, because I saw an article, Dan O'Brien, talking about the shiver going down the spines of homeowners because the governor of the central bank recently said that there's a risk that property prices may fall. And I thought, well, at some stage, why shouldn't the central bank actually warn against, the dysfunction in the property market? That's their job. And I think, I can't remember who said it first. I think it might have been, Janet Yellen in the US. She said, somebody has to take the punch bowl away. You can't all sit getting drunk at the bar and thinking that everything's going to be wonderful. Now, I have my problems with the central bank, and they're on record, as we know. But for people then to turn around and say, oh, it's a bad thing that property prices won't continue to rise forever, that is just complete lunacy. I want children coming up now to be able to afford a house, and how could they ever aspire to a home ownership? We're looking at a country now that did have, 4 years ago had, I think, owner-occupier rates were about 68%. We know they've fallen below the 1971 lowest point, which was their previous lowest point, and that stat is already 18 months old, so it's probably fallen again. Okay, so we've got the lowest owner-occupier rents in the history of the state, and now we've got the tenuous rental conditions, and we've got no security of tenure, and we've got rents that are above any other time, like they're past Celtic Tiger boom periods. Yeah. It's toxic. So you're talking about...
But the effect of that, though, is the gross inflation of property prices in Dublin now, which is exactly what happened during the Celtic Tiger. And we said, we'll never allow this to happen again. And here we are, 2018, and we're in exactly the position we were in at the height of the Celtic Tiger, with all of its intellectual and ethical failings. But the effect of the rise in property prices has been to get rid of negative equity for properties that are distressed. It has helped to recapitalise the banks. Now, if you were a conspiracy theorist, would you say that the government is ideologically acting in the interests of the banking and financial services sector over and above the interests of the Irish citizen? because that's what happened with the bailout.
You wouldn't have to be a conspiracy theorist to say that.
And the false narrative in our public discourse, we did not get bailed out by the IMF. We bailed out the banks. The Irish citizen, you and I and everybody listening and our children and our grandchildren, we bailed out bankers who behaved irresponsibly and recklessly, and there has been no moral hazard for them. And here we are. It's predictable, exactly back at where we were, and we don't have we don't have money for services for our children who have special needs, for our homeless and so on. But there seems to be a bottomless, a very deep pocket for those particular interests. Now, I just want to finish that point by saying that the Taoiseach has FaceTime with special advisors from the banking financial services sector who are nominated to advise him. And these are the same people who told us that the fundamentals are sound. Whereas if you were advocating or lobbying on the part of people who are sick or homeless, you cannot get FaceTime with the Taoiseach. They deliberately ignore you. So this is, again, about the social contract. I don't think that people who vote for Fianna Fáil or for Fine Gael really want the type of society that we're getting. We need to wake up, hold our politicians to account, and get them to straighten up and fly right. One little thing that I think would be a good start. I mean, I think personally, now that I'll be 52 this year, I'm getting older, ethics has to be brought into everything that we do in Irish life, politically, financially, in business. It's ethical failings that are leading to this cycle of scandal after scandal after scandal. And one small thing that our politicians could do, when I was an army officer, we swore a solemn oath of allegiance to uphold the Constitution. And if you were in breach of that oath of allegiance, you're committing treason. Every Irish politician, when they're elected into office, should swear a solemn oath of allegiance to uphold our Constitution and fundamentally to always act in the public interest. And any politician who's found to be in breach of that oath, there should be legislation enacted to have them impeached and banned from public office. Because we're aware now that politicians behind the scenes are doing side deals and backroom deals and appointing cronies to boards. That needs to be stamped out so that the social contract is re-established, so that in the same way you trust the pilot of the Aer Lingus jet to fly safely and take you to your destination, our politicians need to straighten up and fly right, behave ethically, but we have to hold them to a particular standard. And I think a start would be an oath of allegiance. And isn't it shocking that in 2018 you even have to articulate this idea that you have to hold them to account like children? They're like children in a sweet shop. Once they're elected, they're in the circle, they start to appoint their friends, and it's across all of the parties. Labour, Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, they all do it. It's like gangs. One crowd get into power and they appoint all their cronies. And it is no surprise then when you do that you have scandals in An Garda Síochána, in our health service. It just, but the good people who vote for them don't intend for these consequences or outcomes to take place. It's the political class that need to clean up their act. And I'm sorry to have to say that, but that seems to be the case.
Well, I think I'll bring it back with Owen. You should know as a parent, once Owen was diagnosed at 18 months, you should know as a parent that Owen should be able to go to school, Owen will be able to live independently, that when you're gone, Owen will be supported, that you can literally rest in peace knowing that your child is taken care of. Now, in 100 years of Irish society, there is no pathway for a child that's disabled, we'll say from birth to death. There's no pathway. You have to fight every single step to move to another step, and there may not be steps along the way. In fact, there isn't steps along the way. You may have to create your own steps. So you're constantly in conflict with the system, constantly. But as yesterday we were told, half the politicians in Leinster House have an income or a value of
they're all millionaires.
Million plus. Now, when you have people value million plus in a place, they socialise with people in that circle, they talk to people within that circle, that is their peer group. When they make decisions, it is, whether intentionally or unintentionally, it all coloured by that. So Owen, who doesn't have 1 million books, who isn't a millionaire, he's not in that circle. He's not part of their consideration at all. He's a bother. And anybody who's disabled for this government is a bother. Not somebody to be cherished, not somebody to be taken care of, simply somebody to be gotten out of the way.
Yeah. Well, the only hope I have in relation to this is I'm in the privileged position that I'm a lecturer in Dublin Institute of Technology, and I deal. Most of my students are postgraduate students. They're in their mid-20s, and I ask them, put up your hand. Anybody in here in this lecture room, hands up. Anybody who can reasonably expect to buy their own home. Hands up in this room. Anybody who can reasonably expect to have a job that has security and reasonable prospects for, stability and predictability. No hands go up. That generation are going to hopefully be the engine of change in our society. Because when you have the vast majority of young people who are outside of that loop that you've just described, that's my hope, that they will engineer the change that is necessary to kind of reboot our society back to a situation where we have social justice and equity, a bit of fairness. Like you were talking about the politicians rubbing shoulders with the people who lobby them, and they have the same outlook, the same expectations, the same sort of intellectual political
Echo
reference
chamber.
points. Yeah. But I also think our media, our political correspondents particularly,
Are captured.
The political correspondence pool, the Oireachtas Press Gallery, they are too close to the people that they are supposed to hold to account. And I've noticed now, in an area where I have a special interest as a journalist, security and defence, my friend Maurice McCabe, the Garda whistleblower, the language that political correspondents have used to describe him in the past, and some of the security correspondents, not all of them, some of the security correspondents, is an extension of the establishment and the political class. So that rather than political correspondence and our public discourse and journalism, rather than them holding the powerful to account, holding up a mirror to them, instead they have become an almost seamless extension of the establishment. There are a number of journalists in the broadsheet titles who are quite simply unpaid government spokespersons, who are supporters in their editorial, in their analysis, unapologetic supporters, particularly of Fine Gael government policy. How do I know this? Because we have students doing research in the School of Media and DIT who do content and discourse analysis, and time again, these journalists replicate the views and attitudes of, and so that's something where again platforms like this can challenge the received views of establishment media. I think there's a lot of criticism of digital media and social media and all of the new platforms. Actually, I think they're a positive force in society, because at least we can hear other voices and alternative views.
Well, there was an example of exactly what you're talking about there, when the Dennis Naughton issue came up. Within an hour of that story breaking on the national broadcaster, a news bulletin said, explained the story, but then said, but it's not a resigning matter. And I thought, who are you to decide it's not a resigning matter? Why are you giving out that narrative already that it's not a resigning matter? The full story isn't even out there, and you've set the perimeters of the story.
As you say, it's a captured system. I recall when Minister for Justice had to resign, and I was actually in studio with a very well-known presenter, and it was live. And in breaking news, the Minister for Justice has just resigned, and he said, now the big story is going to be who's going to get that job. Yeah. Will it be Francis Fitzgerald?
And
I said, actually, I interrupted and I said, no, that's not the big story, who's going to replace him. The big story is we can no longer have confidence in the administration of justice in a European Union state. That's the story. But instead, you get all of the soap opera of the Healy Rays and so on. So the political correspondents burn up all this airtime, which is paid for, for the most part, by the taxpayer, to actually not focus on the real issue. So I think that there is a huge potential in social media and alternative platforms for real voices to emerge that are going to help us in this overall process. Like Ireland is, I think, 100 years after the War of Independence, in this decade of commemorations, Ireland is in many respects broken. It doesn't function. It's become very, very dysfunctional. And that's very, very dangerous, even for my capacity as a security. That's a risk multiplier. We see it in the proliferation of gun crime in the city, a tolerance for a drug epidemic that we're talking about in areas that are considered disadvantaged. You know, Ireland is a very good place to live and we're a wonderful people, but we need to have a political movement like this Yes Equality campaign I'm advocating to reboot us and get us to fly straight so that we keep some of the things that make Ireland so unique and so special. What we don't want to become is the 52nd or the 53rd state of the United States of America.
And it was actually captured as well this week with Tony O'Brien's resignation. There was a very, very funny moment when Tony O'Brien, so we had, in the build-up to Tony O'Brien's resignation, the Taoiseach stood up in the Dáil and said that he's not interested in seeing heads roll and he's not calling for any heads. He used those two phrases. Then Tony O'Brien resigned, which I have to go on the record and say both Vicky Phelan and Emma Mahuna said, Taoiseach, you have to fire that guy. I want you to say the words, you're fired. Now, I'm going to parse that and say, if Tony O'Brien had been fired, maybe he takes a wrongful dismissal case against the state. I don't think that really, no one cares. I think the women of Ireland wanted to know that their lives were given value and that they were going to be listened to. Didn't happen. He was allowed to resign. You take the story immediately became, and I remember having to turn off the radio because they said the language was the exact same. Mary Lou was one of the key people calling for his head now, and I just went, wow, we're back to this. The language has been repeated, what the Taoiseach said. No one called for anybody's head. There was no decapitation. I know it's a turn of phrase, but if I tweeted you and I said, I'm gonna cut off your head on Twitter, I could be done for hate speak, right? It's not acceptable that we change the discourse. No, women are dead. Let's talk about the actual issue. Let's get to the facts. Let's not talk about rake over the coals of...
Well, I did find a great example of where Leo Varadkar, in the Dáil after the Jobstown trial, Paul Murphy was there. And he said to Paul Murphy, and I'm paraphrasing this, is that, look, you're in a position of leadership, Paul Murphy. You're responsible for what happened out there because you were in a position of leadership. You owe everybody an apology. Now, how is that any different for Leo Varadkar as Minister for Health, for Simon Harris for Minister for Health, for Tony O'Brien, for all of them? How is it any different? Well, again, they were in the positions of leadership.
But this is the ethical formation that I was talking about. As a leader, you have to walk the walk as well as talk the talk. And whilst Tony O'Brien has authority to be Chief Executive or Director General of our health services, the responsibility lies with Simon Harris and Leo Varadkar. You can abrogate authority, you can delegate authority, you cannot delegate responsibility.
Absolutely.
And that's something that you find in all of the language that's used and the rhetoric that is, particularly by Leo Varadkar. There's a PhD thesis to be written about the language and the rhetoric that Leo Varadkar mobilises continuously to distance himself from his responsibility. What he says is, this is a matter for the HSE, or this is a matter for the policing authority, or this is so that's one of his classic tactics is to shift responsibility, even though ethically you cannot do that. The second thing he will always say is, I don't talk about or comment on individual cases. And yet Vicky Phelan and all of the others have come forward, have had to give up their anonymity in order to have a meaningful discussion about the situations that confront people in Ireland. It's the same as when you have, these awful cases where victims of abuse and sexual abuse and rape come forward. They give up their anonymity so that people can hear about the perpetrator. The people who are responsible for our homeless crisis, for the situation in our health service, which is completely unnecessary and needless suffering for thousands of people, are the Taoiseach, the Minister for Health. And I have a feeling as this story moves on and more people emerge, I think that Leo Varadkar and his actions and his inaction as Minister for Health will come into the frame. But I just want to say, guys, because I know we're running out of time, I am a retired army officer. I should be the most conservative person in the room. And here I am, saying that we should have a revolution. Like, there's something seriously wrong in our polity and in our public discourse. We really need, I think that the useful phrase is to reboot and get back to the values that are so intrinsic to all Irish people. And I'm confident that there are hundreds of thousands of people out there who do vote for Fine Gael and who do vote for Fianna Fáil. And they're good people. But we need to have a change at the top. They need to be held accountable. How we do that is a work in progress. But this discussion and this awakening needs to continue. And I'm optimistic that our young people, the demographic cohorts that are coming behind us, who have been excluded.
The locked out generation.
They're locked out from home ownership. They're locked out from the capacity to have children. Like, where did these, masters of the universe that are whispering in Pascal O'Donoghue's ear, where do they think their little consumers are going to come from? Where do they think the workers are going to come from?
Who's going to pay their pensions?
If our beautiful young Irish people can't have kids, can't buy houses, can't get a secure roof over their head. So that's the generation that I think will unlock what is necessary for us to get back to the values and the value consensus and the functioning society that has been a feature of Irish life up until recently.
That's always been the generation that could make a difference. But we've always shipped that generation elsewhere. That's our biggest export, is that generation.
Well, I think now, Martin, I think Tom was right, though, because when you hit on the two-tier economy that we have, and that goes back to Dan O'Brien's point, that it's the landed people who had the shiver down their spine when they said property prices might come down, when you're actually thinking, well, if we thought in terms of the greater good, actually an affordable house wouldn't be a bad thing for everybody,
Yeah, no, it'd be good for the economy, it'd be good for foreign direct investment. You can see actually some of Fine Gael's policy imperatives are starting to eat them, because we now see that some of the big multinationals don't want to locate here because there's no housing stock or affordable rent for their workers.
Again, even to be able to say that multinationals are telling us when we have 10,000 homeless people, it's which 10,000 homeless people, their voice is less than one multinational coming in here and saying, I haven't got enough houses.
Well, that's what I say. Like a lobbyist, so-called lobbyist, can pick up the phone and get a minister's ear immediately. Donald Trump can ring our Taoiseach. Enda Kenny was famously giving out his mobile phone number. And I actually at the time spoke to Enda Kenny at a lunch that I was at and asked him, was he going to do anything for children with disabilities during the period of austerity? And he looked me in the eye and said, no, he wouldn't.
But you see, this is back to, and it's the old adage, showbiz, or politics is showbiz for the ugly. Politics is showbiz for the ugly. And at the moment, what we have is show business. It's all jazz hands, razzmatazz, lots and lots of stats and data thrown at you.
Well, there's a lot of actual training that goes on, media training, as opposed to actually doing the job. That's very clear. There's a lot of media training. I think
as well, though, the public need to be informed about the politically appointed media advisors.
Yes.
Like, no country in the European Union spends as much money as we do on government communication. You have a government information service which has, I believe, up to 40 people working for it full time. You have the Strategic Communications Unit, which is recently disbanded. The Taoiseach has his own communications advice. Every minister has a politically appointed media advisor.
And quite often they were op-ed writers for one of the...
Quite often they were journalists. Now, in addition to that, each of our government departments has full-time public servants at sometimes at assistant principal or principal officer level who are full-time employed in community. We have an army of people paid for by the taxpayer. I did research on this. It's published in Liverpool University Press, Political Communications in Ireland. We spend 10 times on communications more than the UK or our other European Union partners on government communication in Spain. So because we're spending so much, surely then we must have the best political communication in the world, never mind Europe. But that's not the case. We have a completely dysfunctional, unethical manner of communicating. And it's all part of that piece. But I think, look, one little suggestion I would have is make these people swear an oath of allegiance to
I think it's a great idea.
And hold them to account. And isn't it terrible to think that you would have to ask our politicians to do that? But I think it might be a good idea.
I always go back to the Advertising Standards Agency of Ireland. Okay, if I put up an ad, and I remember Carlsberg used to say probably the best lager in the world, and they had to just change it to probably because they couldn't make that claim, and they said advertising standards. Yeah, the politician can go up and say what they want to say, and then it's never actually held against them in terms of you went one way, you did the opposite. Actually, that's a breach of contract of service, right?
Yeah,
You're employed as a contract of service. You've breached your T's and C's. We don't have that accountability. We don't build it into the political structure. And they don't want to build it into political structure because, as we know at the moment, they're just conscious of getting to, I think it's, what is it, Martin, the 21st of May when they're...
Pensionable time.
This government will have earned...
They have so, and it's so cynical
it is.
that they have hung in there when everything... Tichamasakela is the best way I can describe falling apart, and they've hung in for the pensions.
Yeah. But we have some good politicians. I have to say.
I don't mean it. I
don't want to sound kind of relentlessly negative about. I know that there are lots of politicians there, men and women, who are well-meaning and well-intentioned and well-motivated, but it's just, I suppose, we're reaching a point of critical mass where the level of dysfunction and the breakdown of value consensus in Irish public life, in our society, is getting to the point where it's becoming dangerous and unhelpful. And I'm hoping that the good people in Leinster House and maybe new people who come forward for election might begin to move us in a healthier direction. Because, as you said, this is ideological. These are choices. It's a choice that we have 2,000 people. 2,000 children homeless in Dublin. That's not a housing emergency. That's government policy.
Yeah, completely.
That is a predictable, hypothetical outcome of current government policy. And similarly, the reason why we have all these people on trolleys in our A&E departments, and the reason why we can't fill trained consultant posts, and the reason why we can't retain our nursing staff, our physiotherapists and OTs, is a consequence of government policy. It's a policy of eroding and undermining medical leadership, the privatisation and the monetising of healthcare. It's an American model. It's the reason why Roisin Shortall resigned as a junior minister of state. What a rare and unusual thing for an Irish politician to resign. And in fairness to her, she said that James Riley and Fine Gael were taking us on a business model of health that was based on the US system. And I can guarantee you there's no Fine Gael voter up and down the country who wants to have an American style health service. But that's what we're getting. And that's what I mean again, the pilot analogy. When you get in an aircraft, you expect to be brought to your destination safely. Politicians need to have the same social contract. Bring us where we want to go, not what the fat cats and lobbyists are telling you to do. Listen to the people.
You talk ethics. And I have a different word for it, and it's a word that no matter how much you disagree with the politicians of past, that this generation of politicians largely don't have. It's honour. It's to do the honourable thing, to be an honourable person, to be a politician there for the good of the people, not for the good of yourself, not for the good of your crony mates, not for developers. You're there because you're elected by, and this is the basic, you're elected by the citizens.
Martin, I'm going to, Paul Hosford put it better when he was on. He turned around and he said, no, Martin, that if you were to talk about honour, that's not, if something that is a resigning matter, we take Amber Rudd again, in an email chain, stood down from a very big job in the UK, she stood down. Dennis Naughton, as you said initially, immediately, within the hour, it was established this is not a resigning matter. Now, that's not on Dennis Naughton. That's on the public, the media, the fact that we just kind of shrug our shoulders and get on with it. Because if he can hang on and know that within 1 week,
the cycle is shifted.
The cycle has moved on, and he's able. And I heard he was hosting a conference on Minister for Communication, Dennis Knockin, hosting a conference on fake news. And I thought, oh, so we've moved on. We no longer refer to the scandal.
Unfortunately, that was overtaken by this appalling vista.
Yeah.
Where you have the betrayal of thousands of Irish women, mothers, our sisters, our daughters betrayed in this way. And the confidence then, the value consensus, the trust in the medical profession and our medical programs, that's a big story. That's a huge story. But I just want to say, the ethical probity of a nation or a country is measured in how it treats its most vulnerable citizens. And our most vulnerable citizens are being treated awfully. Another test of the ethical probity of a culture is when you tell the truth.
I was going to ask you this.
And I can tell you as a whistleblower in Ireland, when you tell the truth in Ireland, and I ended, my crime was to draw attention to the sexual violence, sexual assault and rape of female soldiers. What worse crime could you draw attention to? And for that, I was ostracised. I became the subject of a very intense campaign of character assassination. I have been punished for this. It ends your career prospects, not just within the Defence Forces, but your prospects of promotion elsewhere. I am not the type of person or any other whistleblower in Ireland who gets appointed to boards, who's invited to, speak or contribute on matters around defence and security or property. So when, my kids, every fairy tale that they hear, every moral tale in school talks about doing the right thing and speaking the truth. But in Ireland, when you tell the truth, you are punished, you're ostracised, whereas people who engage actively in wrongdoing are rewarded,
lose their phones,
promoted, are given big jobs in Europe. Now, as a society, what are we going to tell our children? What do I say to one of my children if they come to me and say, I'm concerned about an ethical issue at work, or what advice would I give them? Unfortunately, the advice I would give them now is to get legal advice and be very, very careful. That's how dysfunctional our society is.
Well, the Examiner yesterday did that rich list of politicians, and at the very, very top of the rich list of politicians, and it was the picture they captured for the piece, was Michael Lowry. And I just retweeted the piece and I put over it, remember children, crime does not pay.
There are findings against that man in a Moriarty tribunal sitting there.
Do you blame him?
Hang on, exactly. Enda Kenny took power in 2011 and actually said the words, I accept in full the findings of the Moriarty tribunal and we will invoke them there. And he never took one further step to enaction it. Forget about what's going to happen with Leo, because that's just old news now. He's on to the next thing. But the simple fact is we accepted that. And now we see a Garda commissioner who lost 9 out of 12 phones, 2 hard drives. We know Philip Boucher-Hayes, we know very definitely is going to testify that...
Mick Clifford said today on the radio on the way in that Mick Clifford reckons he's going to be called in as well. So there's quite a few people. This story today is going to develop, particularly the Maurice McCabe story.
Well, because David Taylor is now going to give testimony that he was told to engage in a media campaign to smear Maurice McCabe.
Yeah. So what does that say about our society? Like, if we had whistleblowers during the Celtic Tiger, if we had whistleblowers... We did.
His name was Jonathan Sugarman, and we ruled him.
But he was ignored, like he was punished, sanctioned, isolated, silenced. And that's what was my experience. That's Maurice McCabe's experience. But if Ireland valued our whistleblowers, if we'd had whistleblowers in the financial services and banking sector, like Jonathan Sugarman, if they were rewarded and recognised, maybe we wouldn't owe the billions that we owe now. Maybe we wouldn't be in the crisis that we're in.
I've thought about this, because I've been blowing the whistle on bogus self-employment for quite a long time. And like you, I've had real ups. I've had the guards come through my front door. There's a file in the crime and security branch about me. For what reason, I have no idea. I have been ridiculed. It took 15 years to get a minister to actually sit down and actually talk with me about it for an hour. Got that done. And then basically the minister said, oh, fuck that. I'm not going to say anything about that. Yeah. And the cycle moved on.
But wasn't it interesting though? Emma, the second lady in...
Mick Bahuna.
Yeah. she said that she had no confidence in Leo Varadkar.
Yes.
She said that she had no confidence in Simon Harrison. She said she appealed to our president, Michael D. Higgins, can you please do something? And I believe he's going to speak to her this week. But Michael D. Higgins, our president, needs to get all of the whistleblowers into Áras an Uachtaráin at least once a year and have a big reception for them, so that Irish people get, that we begin to value and recognise our whistleblowers and people who are prepared to behave ethically and to speak up. And it's by valuing them and recognising them that we will begin to move forward.
Well, we should actually be actively seeking out whistleblowers to whistleblow on wrongdoing in the state, particularly where it's costing money. I think there should be a reward system.
Business, finance, all of our public and private sectors pay billions every year on audit. It's compulsory. Audit identifies, I think, something like 2 or 3% of wrongdoing in the workplace, whether it be financial corruption or what have you. Over 50% of wrongdoing in business and elsewhere is identified by people who speak up in the workplace.
Yeah.
And that costs nothing. So instead of punishing these people, whistleblowers add value to business. People who tell the truth add value to business, to political parties, to banking, to finance, to everything. It's a no-brainer. What we need, though, is the maturity and the ethical formation to recognise that. And the type of rhetoric that is mobilised by people like Leo Varadkar and his advisors and so on, that is anathema. That is the opposite of what is necessary to bring about the kind of new politics that we were promised back in 2011.
Well, we do have new politics. It's new in that it's worse than the last one that was there.
New and improved.
New and disimproved is the way I'd put it.
But I mean, we have to be optimistic, though. We have to, like our age group, our age cohort. I'm in my 50s now. My children are going to say, what did you do in the crisis? We've got to speak up. We've got to try and put ourselves forward and change that toxic culture. And I think it is beginning to unravel. You know, Tony O'Brien losing his kind of status as an insider. I think that the penny may drop with other big appointees that, you can't actually preside over a system that is dangerous or unethical and expect to get away with it. Now, I'm not saying that that's what he did, but this message might get out there.
As in politics, in everything, once the wave starts, if there's a wave, things can change very quickly. And they do. And that's the way it works. Everything looks the same for decades. All of a sudden there's a wave and everything changes. Everything changes. Mm. We need that. We're overdue our wave. We're long overdue.
But there are some heroes there. There's people like Maurice McCabe. You mentioned Nick Clifford, a brilliant journalist, the exception to the rule. Philip Boucher Hayes. Mm. There are within our state broadcaster and out there in the for-profit media sector that we still have champions who really are journalists. But there are some...
Ellen Coyle, when she took on the government with their paid editorials.
Ellen Coyle, and these are people who actually, that's what journalism is all about. That's what it should be, holding the powerful to account. There are other journalists, though, there who really ought to have a good long look at themselves in the mirror and say, look, I'm going to leave whatever broadsheet newspaper it is as a political editor or political correspondent, and just get that job as the political advisor to a particular government minister.
Instead of sitting here hatching, waiting.
You just put yourself forward, because that's, so I salute the heroes, the ones who are the insiders, the cronies, the ones who have the inside track. Think about your own children and your own grandchildren, and how will your actions benefit them in everything from health to the administration of justice and policing in this state. Both An Garda Síochána and the Irish people deserve to have a proper, confident police service that enjoys the support and confidence of the people. And there are certain journalists there, both as political correspondents and security correspondents, who really ought to, see the big picture and do the right thing. Be a hero instead of just being an insider.
Yeah, totally agree with you.
I think that's a really great place to wrap it up, Tom, because you've given us I First of all, thanks for coming over. Second of all the best to you and your family. And we pay attention. We do try and help you. We get these things out there. We try and support things as we go along. But you know what? You're a great voice for both people with disabilities, and you're also a great voice for whistleblowers, and that is appreciated. It's not an easy lane to plough to furrow. You know what I'm trying to say now, but it's an admirable quality that you keep on going. Again, I think what you've really hit on, and I hope listeners pick up on it, we do need some sort of ethical code of conduct, whether you want to call it that, or a pledge of allegiance, or
we need a consequence for not being ethical, and we do need a consequence for not being, and it has to be. There's no point in saying, okay, I resign. There's my awful consequence. Retire on my 5 times average income pension. The way to hit people, and I'd rather not put them in jail. I'd rather take their money away. That's how I do.
Well, I think that's the thing. Once when they're appalled, when they come into the frame, when they're called out on their behaviour, they express their regret, they express their sorrow, but the regret and the sorrow is for the fact that they are now out of the network.
That's right.
And that they've lost their status and their network of cronies. This is what really upsets them. So we have to find a way of having these people excluded from the networks, and every appointment at board level, and the wives of ministers being appointed to very, very senior positions.
Oh yeah.
That kind of thing needs to be really, we should have zero tolerance for that in the 21st century in a society like this. But look, thanks for having me on. We have to try and remain positive and optimistic. I don't think I did anything except I just did the right thing. I did it naively. I never knew what was coming next. My father used to shake his head looking at me saying, could they not get some other gobshite to do that? But one thing though, the army taught me how to fight, and I'll keep fighting for my son, and we'll try to do the best that we can for other kids and young adults and people out there who need our support and who can't defend or fight for themselves. That's what we have to do, is fight the good fight. And we make mistakes, but we keep going.
I totally agree. And I'd just like to add, Maurice McCabe, if you're listening, a lot of us today know this is going to be a difficult day for you, and we're all there on your side.
Thanks, guys. Really appreciate it. Thanks for listening. See you again, folks.